If your child has OCD, OCD has a secret weapon, and it's hiding its compulsions in reassurance. How are you supposed to handle that? Stay tuned. That's what's up next. Often when we think about compulsions with OCD, we think that our kids are hand washing or tapping or straightening. But more often than not, they are talking to you. You are completing their OCD loop. Reassurance is one of the biggest compulsions that kids do when they have OCD. So let me tell you what it is, what it looks like, and how to respond. A big part of OCD is checking and doubt. And so when you're a kid and you're doubting something, who do you go to? You don't check with Google, although you might when you're a teenager. You check with you. And so your child will be doing compulsions that are checking compulsions, but they're checking with you. And so you need to be aware of it, because every time you answer that child, you're not talking to your child, you're talking to OCD. Does this sound familiar? That was so long ago. It's just a thought. Well, you wouldn't do it, so don't worry about it. I don't see anything. No, that's not poison. No, I think you're fine. That happened 4 years ago. No, you can eat that. It's fine. You're not a bad kid. You're not going to do that. No, that's not dirty. I'm not sure where you're talking about. I don't see it. It hasn't expired. I don't see it. The thing about reassurance, when it's a compulsion and not just regular parenting reassurance, is your child is never going to be satisfied. They're like a big black hole that will never get filled up because it's a compulsion. And so they really aren't listening to your words. You are completing their OCD loop. You are the sink. Think of hand washing. When a child has OCD, contamination OCD, and they feel like they are germy, they're going to go to the sink and they're going to wash over and over again. When kids have other types of OCD, they're going to go to you like a sink, and they're going to wash their worries away. And every time they wash, you complete the OCD loop. And every time you complete the OCD loop, guess what happens? Their OCD grows bigger. So what are you supposed to do? Well, I know you can't quit cold turkey because that is really hard and it's not fair to your child. So there are some steps to take. Number one, explain to them what OCD is. I'm not into labels either, but kids with OCD need to know they are not alone. This is a common disorder. 1 out of every 200 kids has it, and there's a name for it, and this is how it works. If you haven't shown your child my OCD video yet, show it to them. I'll leave a link below, and I'll leave it right here. Second, you want to name the OCD. So it can be funny, because if you can't laugh at this, it's going to be a really long road. So if they're little, have them call it something. Mr. Stinky, Mr. Germy, Mr. Pest. If they're older, it's a dictator, it's O. A lot of kids don't want to call it anything, they just call it OCD. It doesn't matter. But if you can make fun of it and have a funny name, have them name it, that can help. In my video, I explained to kids that when they complete their OCD loop, their OCD grows bigger. So once they get that concept and they realize that asking you for reassurance is completing that OCD loop, then they're going to understand why you're not going to want to help grow their OCD. And you say to them, every time you ask these questions, that is a Mr. Bossy question, I'm feeding Mr. Bossy and he's getting bigger. And I love you. I don't love Mr. Bossy. And I don't want Mr. Bossy to grow. So when Mr. Bossy asks me for the 5th time if this food is okay to eat, or for the 5th time, are they a bad person because they had this thought again, I don't want to answer that, because if I do, I'm giving food to Mr. Bossy and he's growing bigger. It's also helpful, if you haven't already, get a therapist. Don't mess around with OCD. OCD is highly treatable, but the earlier people can get help, the better. If you don't know anybody in your area, there are online therapists that can provide help, or you can take my online class and it will teach you all the tools that you need to help your child at home. I'll leave links below to all of that. So once you have named the OCD, educated your child on what OCD is, educated your child that when you complete the OCD loop, their OCD grows bigger, then you respond this way. If Mr. Bossy wants to talk to me, he can, but let's see if we can wait 5 minutes and see if Mr. Bossy still needs to hear from me. I don't want to talk to Mr. Bossy. Tell Mr. Bossy that I'm not available right now. Is Mr. Bossy trying to talk to us? I'm not feeding Mr. Bossy. Oop, that sounds like Mr. Bossy. I can schedule Mr. Bossy at 5 o'clock. How about tonight at 5? I will talk to Mr. Bossy about all of his concerns. You can talk to Mr. Bossy, but I'm not talking to him. Mr. Bossy is so annoying. I wish he wasn't bothering you. You want to gauge whether your child is really in a lot of distress. And so if you're answering like that and they get really upset, then you can say something like, okay, I'm going to talk to Mr. Bossy for a minute, so please step over there. But when I'm done, we have to know that we did make Mr. Bossy a little bit bigger. And then you say, Mr. Bossy, how can I help you? I'm really annoyed that you're bothering my kid, but what can I do for you? That way you're labeling the OCD, you're identifying that it's an OCD thought and an OCD compulsion, and you're giving your child some relief, but you're also letting them know that they just did a compulsion. That can be helpful for awareness. They're not going to win every battle, and that is okay. You have to know when to help your child and when to stand strong. I do like some intermediate approaches. So if your child's not quite ready for you to completely not talk to Mr. Bossy or the dictator or O, then you can schedule a time to talk to Mr. Bossy. You can give out Mr. Bossy cards. You can have 5 Mr. Bossy cards. And once those cards are used up, I'm not talking to Mr. Bossy. You can try to delay Mr. Bossy and say, can I talk to Mr. Bossy in 5 minutes or 10 minutes? And that teaches kids to delay the need to scratch that itch and do the compulsion. Sometimes after delaying, kids will say, you know what? You don't have to talk to Mr. Bossy. Or you can just come up with a code word. And that code word means, I know this is a Mr. Bossy and I'm not talking to him. Be creative, come up with your own things, whatever works for you. The most important thing is that you recognize that OCD has a lot of compulsions. And one of them, many of them actually, involve you. And the biggest one is going to be reassurance. So when your child's asking for reassurance and they have OCD, you want to take a pause and say, is this an OCD compulsion, or are they genuinely wanting reassurance or this information? A quick way to tell is if you do answer it initially and then your child is not satisfied and they come back over and over and over again. Ideally, you'll eventually start to catch on what is and is not a compulsion related to reassurance, and you won't give it to them at all. I do have a whole podcast on this topic on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. My podcast is called the AT Parenting Survival Podcast, very original. And I will leave a link below. And I have an episode on how to not give reassurance and why it's not a helpful thing. And I go into it for almost an hour, so it's a lot more comprehensive than this quick video. So if you want a little bit more information, go check that out. So have you noticed that your child is asking you questions that seem like a compulsion? If you have an example, leave a comment below. That will help other parents because some parents get super confused about this. So write your own experience in the comments below and help other parents identify what is an OCD compulsion. If you're liking my videos, please don't leave without a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. I hope you find the sparkle in everything you do, and I'll talk to you next Thursday.